The billionaire CEO sat alone at his wife's grave. A single mom asked if he needed a family. The rain had turned the cemetery paths silver. Elliot Grayson sat alone before his wife's grave, his black suit darkening at the shoulders, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the wet grass. He had brought an umbrella, but it lay folded beside him, useless. Maybe because opening it felt too practical. Maybe because grief, after 3 years, still had a way of convincing him he deserved to be uncomfortable. There was no driver waiting at the curb, no assistant hovering with a schedule, no security guard pretending not to watch him brake. For once, the billionaire CEO of Grayson Harbor Group looked like no one important at all. Just a man sitting in the rain with a bouquet of white flowers and a wedding ring he still turned with his thumb whenever he did not know what to do with his hands. The stone in front of him read, Margaret Maggie Grayson, beloved wife, beloved friend. Elliot looked at the name until the letters blurred. We won the Charleston deal, he said quietly. His voice was steady in the way voices became steady when they were holding back too much. You had hated the champagne they served, too sweet. You had smiled politely and then whispered something rude into my ear. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. Then it vanished. Mother still hasn't changed your room. She pretends it's because she respects memory. I think she's afraid if she moves one dress, the whole house will have to admit you're gone. Rain tapped softly against the leaves overhead. Elliot lowered his head. I still haven't sold the boat. That sentence broke something in him. The boat had been repaired after the accident, because insurance companies and investigators liked things cataloged, restored, explained. But Elliot had never stepped on it again. Maggie had been on a charity trip that day, delivering supplies to an island community after a storm. He had missed the trip for a board emergency. Of course he had. There was always a board emergency. There was always one more call, one more signature, one more reason to believe love would still be there when work finally loosened its grip. Elliot pressed his hand against the cold stone. I'm sorry, he whispered. The words were old, worn down, useless from overuse. Still, they were all he had. A few rows away, Clara Bennett held her son's small raincoat hood in one hand and an increasingly wet bouquet in the other. Or she had held her son 5 seconds ago. Noah, she called, keeping her voice low out of respect for the graves. Noah Bennett, if you are naming worms again, I am resigning as your mother. No answer. Clara closed her eyes. Her 7-year-old son had inherited curiosity from both parents and common sense from neither. They had come to visit Aaron's grave, as they did every few months. Noah had decided his father needed a really brave rock, because flowers died too quickly, and rocks, according to Noah, were better at commitment. Then he had vanished between the rows. Clara moved carefully across the wet grass, scanning for a yellow raincoat, small backpack, or a boy crouched over some geological treasure with the focus of an archaeologist discovering breakfast. That was when she saw the man. He sat several rows ahead, alone under the rain, one hand on a grave as if he were waiting for the person beneath it to answer. Something about the stillness of him made Clara stop. She had seen grief before. She had worn it in public places, in grocery aisles, in school offices, in the exhausted space between paying bills and telling a child his father was not coming back. But this man's grief was different only in shape, not substance. Loneliness had made him look smaller than his expensive suit. She only saw a person who had everything around him quiet and no one beside him. She meant to walk past. Then he tried to stand. He had been sitting too long. His knee buckled slightly, and his hand slipped against the wet stone. He caught himself, but not before Clara stepped forward and opened her umbrella over both of them. He looked up, startled. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain drummed against the umbrella. Clara realized too late that she had just inserted herself into a stranger's most private hour. I'm sorry, she said quickly. You looked like you were about to fall. I'm fine. It was the kind of answer adults gave when Fine had clearly left the premises. Clara should have nodded and walked away. Instead, exhausted from the rain, from motherhood, from graves, from watching people pretend loneliness was polite, she heard herself ask, Do you need a family too? The question landed between them like something breakable. Elliot stared at her. Clara's face went hot. That sounded less strange in my head, she said. Actually, no, it sounded strange there too. His expression shifted, not quite confusion, not quite pain. She tightened her grip on the umbrella handle. My son asked me that once, she explained. We had an elderly neighbor who ate dinner alone every night. Noah wanted to know if people could run out of family and need to borrow some. The man looked back at the grave. For a long moment he did not answer. Then he said very softly, I had a family. I'm not sure I still know how to be in one. Clara felt the honesty of that more than she wanted to. Before she could respond, Noah appeared from behind a nearby angel statue, triumphantly holding up a small gray stone. "Mom, I found one with a stripe. That means it has character." Clara exhaled in relief and irritation. "Noah Bennett, I aged 7 years." Noah noticed Elliot and immediately lowered his voice, because he was strange but not rude. Then he looked at the gravestone. "Maggie," he read carefully. Clara winced. "Noah." He placed the striped stone near the white flowers. "This can be Maggie Rock. It can keep the flowers company after they get tired." Clara closed her eyes. "I am so sorry." But Elliot laughed. It was quiet, rough, and surprised, as if the sound had been locked somewhere inside him, and Noah had accidentally found the key. "No," Elliot said. "I think she would have liked Maggie Rock." Noah nodded solemnly, pleased with his work. At that moment, an older cemetery employee passing with a cart slowed down. "Mr. Grayson?" he asked. "Do you need assistance?" Clara froze. "Grayson. Elliot Grayson." The name arrived with headlines attached. "Billionaire CEO, Grayson Harbor Group, Boston's widowed shipping magnate, the Maggie Grayson Foundation." Clara stepped back at once, pulling Noah gently with her. "I didn't realize," she said. "I'm sorry. We didn't mean to intrude." Elliot saw the distance return to her face. He had watched it happen 1,000 times. The moment people stopped seeing him and started seeing the name. But this woman had asked him if he needed a family before she knew he owned anything that mattered. "You didn't intrude," he said. Clara looked uncertain. "People ask me about acquisitions," he continued. "About donations. About what Maggie would have wanted for the foundation." His eyes returned briefly to the grave. "No one asks whether I still know how to go home." The rain softened around them. Clara did not know what to do with that kind of confession from a man she had known for 4 minutes. So she did nothing dramatic. She only held the umbrella steady until he had his balance. Then she lowered it and stepped back. "We should go," she said to Noah. Noah waved at Elliot. Then, with the seriousness of a child offering logistical grief support, he asked, "Are you going to sit here by yourself next year too?" Clara touched his shoulder. "No." Elliot looked at the grave, then at the boy. "I don't know." Noah considered this. "If you do, you should bring snacks. Crying probably uses energy." For the second time that day, Elliot laughed. Clara saw it then. Not the billionaire, not the widower from the articles, not the man wrapped in the mythology of a dead wife and a powerful name. She saw a lonely man who did not need admiration. He needed to be seen. And as she walked away with Noah's small hand in hers, Clara had the unsettling feeling that the questions she had asked by accident might not be finished with any of them yet. 3 days later, Elliot Grayson walked into the Willow Creek Community Library, carrying a check no one had asked for. It was not a small check. Elliot did not really understand small checks. In his world, help usually arrived with lawyers, foundations, naming rights, and a discreet photographer standing far enough away to pretend dignity had been preserved. He told himself he was there because the Maggie Grayson Foundation had once funded the library's children's reading program. That was true. It was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that he had thought about Clara Bennett's question every night since the cemetery. "Do you need a family too?" He had also thought about Noah placing a striped stone beside Maggie's flowers and naming it with the solemn confidence of a tiny priest. So he came to the library. The building was old brick, modest and warm, with a faded mural of animals reading books painted along one wall. Inside, children's voices carried from the back room. A copier groaned near the circulation desk. Somewhere, someone was whispering too loudly about dinosaur facts. Clara was behind the front desk, repairing the spine of a battered picture book with careful fingers. She looked up when Elliot entered. Her expression did not become impressed. It became cautious. That was new for him. Most people saw him and rearranged themselves. Clara simply looked as if she were deciding whether he was a complication she had time for. Elliot explained that he wanted to see the reading program Maggie's foundation had supported. Clara listened politely, then glanced at the check folder in his hand. When he offered to increase funding, she did not smile with gratitude. She closed the folder and pushed it gently back toward him. The library, she said, did not need another wealthy person writing a large check and disappearing after a photograph. It needed someone to show up on Friday afternoons when volunteers canceled, when toddlers threw crayons, when shy children needed a patient adult to read the same page 3 times. Elliot looked toward the children's room as if she had invited him into combat. Clara almost smiled. He agreed anyway. That Friday, Elliot Grayson sat cross-legged on a carpet decorated with cartoon owls and discovered that a room full of children was more intimidating than a hostile board. He held a picture book too stiffly. He turned pages too slowly. He read a bear's dialogue in the exact tone one might use to announce quarterly losses. Noah, seated near the front with a collection of rocks lined up beside his sneaker, frowned deeply. The bear, according to Noah, sounded like a lawyer who had lost his suitcase. A little girl asked why the rabbit had the same voice as the grandmother. Another child interrupted to announce that his uncle had a ferret. Elliot paused, lost. Clara stood by the doorway, one hand over her mouth, pretending not to laugh and failing. By the third week, Elliot learned. Not perfectly, never perfectly. But he learned to sit on the floor, without worrying about the crease in his trousers. He learned that children did not care about his net worth, his foundation, or his last name. They cared whether he remembered the dragon's voice, and whether he could accept being corrected by a 7-year-old with peanut butter on his sleeve. Noah corrected him most often. He also liked him most openly. That worried Clara. Noah began saving rocks for Elliot. A blue-gray one named Harold, a flat white one called Miss Pancake, a tiny speckled pebble named Sir Emotional Support. Elliot accepted each one with the seriousness of a man receiving rare diplomatic gifts. Then Noah asked if Elliot liked mac and cheese. Elliot said he did. This was not strictly true. He had not eaten boxed mac and cheese since college, and even then under circumstances involving bad judgment and a broken microwave. Noah took the answer as a binding agreement. So Clara found herself hosting Elliot Grayson for dinner in her small apartment, above a bakery that made the hallway smell like cinnamon and debt. She nearly canceled 4 times. The apartment was clean but lived in. School papers on the fridge, second-hand chairs, a blanket folded over the sofa, stacks of books waiting to be repaired. Dinner was mac and cheese browned too much on top, bagged salad, and lemonade Noah insisted was fancy because it had slices of lemon floating in it. Elliot stood in the doorway holding a bottle of wine so expensive Clara immediately looked offended. He noticed, panicked slightly, and handed it to her like evidence. Noah rescued him by announcing that wine was not good with mac and cheese because adults made too many pairing rules. Elliot laughed and let Clara put the bottle on top of the fridge, where it looked nervous and overdressed. The dinner was chaotic in the gentlest possible way. Noah explained the biographies of 17 rocks. Clara apologized for the burned edges of the macaroni. Elliot admitted he liked the burned parts, which Clara did not believe but appreciated. At one point, Noah asked whether billionaires had to do dishes or if they just bought new plates. Elliot looked at the sink, then rolled up his sleeves. Clara watched him wash plates under a faucet that squeaked when turned too far left, and something in her chest became inconveniently soft. He was not good at this life, but he was trying to be present inside it. That mattered more than competence. The next Friday, Beatrice Grayson arrived at the library. She did not storm in. Women like Beatrice did not storm. They entered with enough quiet authority that everyone else felt weather had changed. She found Elliot on the carpet, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up, reading a book about a raccoon who wanted to open a bakery. Noah leaned against his side as if he had always belonged there. Beatrice's face tightened. Clara saw it immediately. When story time ended, Beatrice approached with a smile too polished to be kind. She greeted Clara as though Clara were a staff member who had misplaced something valuable. Her words were careful. Her meaning was not. She suggested some women were very skilled at recognizing lonely widowers, that children could become attached quickly, especially when adults encouraged familiarity, that grief made generous men vulnerable to people who knew how to appear wholesome. Clara felt the insult land, clean and sharp. Noah was still nearby, showing another child his rock collection. Children were listening, even when adults pretended they were not. So Clara did not raise her voice. She told Beatrice that a mother had every right to worry about her son. But she did not have the right to turn a child and a librarian into a conspiracy just because kindness made her uncomfortable. Beatrice's eyes flashed. Elliot stepped forward. For most of his life, he had let his mother arrange grief into acceptable shapes. Maggie's room untouched. Maggie's foundation protected from embarrassment. Maggie's memory polished until it became impossible for any living person to stand near it. Not this time. He told Beatrice that Clara had asked him for nothing. Not money, not status, not attention. If anyone in that library needed something, it was him. He needed to learn how to enter the world Maggie had cared about, instead of funding it from a distance and calling that love. The room went still. Beatrice looked at her son as if he had spoken a language she did not want to understand. Then she left. Afterward, Clara found Elliot in the aisle near the children's biographies, holding a book upside down. She thanked him, but her gratitude came with a boundary. Noah was not a life raft. He was not a remedy for loneliness. And Clara would not let her son become the place where Elliot stored all the love he had not known what to do with after Maggie. Elliot accepted the words without defending himself. He said he understood. Then, after a moment, he corrected himself. He was trying to understand. He did not want to borrow a family because his own house was empty. He wanted to know whether he was still capable of belonging to one without turning it into a memorial, a project, or a debt. Clara looked at him for a long time. Outside, rain began again, soft against the library windows. And for the first time, she wondered if some men did not need to be rescued from loneliness. Maybe some only needed to be taught how to knock before entering warmth. Elliot Grayson kept coming back to the library. At first, Clara told herself it was because of Maggie's foundation, then because Noah kept asking when Mr. Graveman would return with the voice of the raccoon baker. Then because the east wall shelf really did need repairing, and Elliot had discovered, with surprising humility, that billionaires were not automatically qualified to use a screwdriver. By the fourth week, none of those excuses held up very well. Elliot came because he wanted to be there, not as a donor, not as a name on a plaque, not as the tragic widower people softened their voices around. He came in rolled sleeves and old jeans, carrying coffee that tasted terrible because the machine in the library staff room seemed committed to punishing optimism. He sorted returned books, he taped labels onto spines. He let Clara tell him he was shelving picture books upside down, and instead of turning it into a committee, he simply fixed it. That was what unsettled her most. He was learning how to be corrected. After closing, they often stayed late together. Clara checked inventory while Elliot stacked chairs. Rain tapped against the windows. The library emptied into a quiet that felt less lonely when shared. Sometimes they talked about ordinary things. Noah's rock collection, Boston traffic, the fact that Elliot had once believed canned soup came from emergency shelves and not grocery stores. Sometimes they talked about nothing at all, and Clara found that silence with him did not demand performance. She began to expect him on Fridays. Then she began to worry because she expected him. That was how trouble started, in her experience. Not with grand declarations, but with small dependencies. A spare umbrella kept near the door, a child asking whether someone would come next week, a woman noticing she had smiled before checking whether she should. Elliot felt it too. He did not flirt loudly. He did not make promises, but his attention changed. It lingered. When Clara reached for a box too high, he steadied the ladder instead of taking over. When Noah interrupted them to explain that Miss Pancake the Rock had emotional weather, Elliot listened as if this information might affect shipping markets. It was ridiculous. Then Elliot invited Clara and Noah to a small event hosted by the Maggie Grayson Foundation, a literacy night for children from underfunded schools. Clara almost refused. Anything with Maggie's name attached felt like walking into a house where the previous owner's perfume still lived in the curtains. But the event supported library programs, and Noah wanted to go because the invitation had gold lettering, and he believed that meant fancy snacks. So Clara went. The venue was elegant but not ostentatious. Warm lights, children's books displayed beside framed photos of Maggie visiting classrooms, volunteers guiding families toward tables full of donated books. Everywhere Clara turned, Maggie smiled from photographs. Wind blown on a dock, kneeling beside children, laughing with a stack of picture books in her arms. People spoke of Maggie with reverence, her kindness, her vision, her warmth, her courage. Clara listened and felt herself shrinking. How did a living woman stand beside a memory everyone had polished until it shone? Elliot noticed her growing quiet, but before he could reach her, Julian Reed intercepted with 2 plastic cups of punch and the expression of a man who had survived many foundation events through strategic sarcasm. Julian, Elliot's lawyer and oldest friend, did not treat Maggie like a saint. That startled Clara. He said Maggie had been generous, stubborn, impatient with bad coffee, and once banned Elliot from using the phrase, scalable compassion at dinner. She loved him, Julian said, but she had also been angry with him often, especially when he thought funding a problem meant he had been present for it. Clara looked across the room at Elliot, helping Noah choose a book. Julian's voice softened. Maggie had not built the foundation to become a shrine. She had built it because she wanted people like Elliot to stop writing checks from safe distances and actually sit with the world's mess. The words stayed with Clara. Later, while helping stack donated books in a side office, Clara found an archival folder left open on the desk. She did not mean to read, but Maggie's handwriting caught her eye on an unsent letter addressed to Elliot. The first lines were ordinary, the last ones were not. Maggie had written that she loved Elliot, but feared that if she died first, he would turn grief into a locked room and call it loyalty. She hoped he would live. She hoped he would love again. And if someone ever came after her, she prayed Elliot would not make that woman compete with a ghost. Clara stood with the letter trembling in her hand. It should have comforted her. Instead, it hurt. Because if Maggie had already named the problem, then what was Clara, a woman Elliot saw? Or merely the answer to a lesson his dead wife had left behind? She returned the letter carefully and said nothing. 2 days later, during story hour, Noah began shivering. At first, Clara thought he was tired. Then she touched his forehead and felt the heat. His face had gone pale, his eyes glassy, his small body suddenly too heavy in her arms. Elliot moved before panic could organize itself. He drove them to the hospital, calm but not controlling, one hand on the wheel, the other ready with his phone. Clara sat in the back with Noah's head in her lap, whispering nonsense because mothers learned that nonsense was sometimes all terror allowed. In the emergency room, Noah drifted in and out beneath a thin blanket. It was a viral infection, the doctor said. High fever, dehydration, frightening but manageable. Clara nodded too many times. Elliot stood nearby, not touching, not claiming space, just present. Then Noah reached out blindly and caught his hand. "Dad," he murmured. The words stopped the room. Clara froze. Elliot did too. For one impossible second, his face opened with such raw longing that Clara could not look away. Then he shut it down, gently smoothing Noah's hair with his thumb while saying nothing. Noah was feverish, confused, half dreaming. That was the explanation. It was also not enough. After Noah stabilized and fell asleep, Clara stepped into the hallway with Elliot. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Nurses moved behind them. Somewhere, a child cried behind a curtain. Clara's voice was quiet but firm. She told him they needed space. Elliot absorbed it like a physical blow. She said he had done nothing wrong that night. That was what made it harder. He had been kind, steady, there when they needed him. But Noah was 7. He had already lost one father. He could not be allowed to build a second one out of uncertainty. Elliot looked through the doorway at Noah sleeping. He did not argue. That was the first mercy he gave her. He only nodded. Later, alone in his house, Elliot opened a video Maggie had recorded before one of her foundation trips. He had avoided it for years because her voice made the rooms unbearable. On the screen, Maggie smiled tiredly into the camera. Then she said the sentence Clara had read in different words. "If love ever finds you again, don't make her compete with a ghost." Elliot broke then. Not beautifully. He folded forward with his hands over his face and wept like a man who finally understood that keeping Maggie in his heart had not been the same as honoring her. He had made her a wall, and anyone living who came close enough to touch it had been hurt by the stone. The photograph appeared online before Clara even made coffee. It had been taken through the hospital glass, slightly blurred, cruelly intimate. Noah asleep in the bed, Clara leaning over him, Elliot standing beside them with one hand resting near the rail, as if he were afraid to touch anything he had not earned the right to hold. By noon, the headline was everywhere. Billionaire widower finds new family at children's library. Some articles were softer, pretending concern. Others were sharper. They called Clara a single mother with modest means. They mentioned the library, Noah's father, the Maggie Grayson Foundation, and Elliot's fortune in the same breath, as if arranging puzzle pieces into a scandal. The comments were worse. People who had never met her decided Clara had planned everything, that she had found a lonely billionaire in a cemetery and placed her child in his path like a hook, that men like Elliot needed protection from women like her. Clara closed the laptop before Noah could see. But children always found out anyway. At school, a boy told Noah his mother was hunting for a rich dad. Noah did not understand all the words, but he understood the insult. He shoved the boy hard enough to be sent to the principal's office. When Clara arrived, Noah was sitting in a chair too large for him, cheeks red, fists still clenched. He did not cry until they got into the car. Then he asked if liking Elliot had made things bad. That question broke Clara more than the articles had. At the library, parents whispered. Some avoided her eyes. A donor asked whether future programs would have clearer boundaries. A woman Clara had helped for years suddenly spoke to her with careful distance, as if scandal might stain through conversation. Elliot tried to call. Clara did not answer, not because she hated him, because every ring of the phone sounded like the door to a world that had already hurt her son. At the Grayson estate, Beatrice used the scandal like proof she had been right all along. She stood in Maggie's untouched sitting room, surrounded by pale furniture and framed photographs, and told Elliot that grief had made him careless. Maggie's name was being dragged through cheap headlines. The foundation was becoming a backdrop for gossip. Clara, intentional or not, had stepped into a place she did not understand. Elliot wanted to defend Clara immediately, but guilt was old muscle memory. He looked at Maggie's photograph on the mantel and heard every unspoken accusation his own heart had been making for 3 years. Had he moved too fast? Had he used Clara and Noah to feel alive? Was love after Maggie a betrayal dressed as healing? Beatrice saw the hesitation and pressed harder. She told him that if he respected Maggie, he would end this quietly. Julian Reed found him later in the garage, sitting inside the boat he had never sold, rain tapping against the roof of the storage building. Julian did not bother with gentleness. Maggie did not need Elliot to protect her memory by abandoning living people. If her legacy could only survive Clara Bennett standing nearby, then it was not love, it was a museum exhibit. Elliot said nothing. Julian sat beside him and added that guilt was not loyalty. Sometimes it was just fear wearing a black suit. 2 nights later, the Maggie Grayson Foundation held its annual gala. Beatrice had made sure Clara was not on the guest list. She had also approved Elliot's speech herself. It was elegant, devastating, and dishonest in the way polished grief could be dishonest. It spoke of eternal love, irreplaceable devotion, and a life forever shaped by one woman. All of that was true. It was also not the whole truth. Clara did not plan to attend the gala. She only came to drop off children's literacy reports requested by the foundation staff. Noah came with her because the babysitter canceled, wearing his little blue jacket and holding Maggie Rock in his pocket for courage. They never made it past the lobby. A reporter recognized her. The question came fast, bright, and ugly. Did she love Elliot Grayson? Had she accepted money? Was her son attached to him? Did she think she could replace Maggie? Clara tried to move past. The reporter stepped with her. Noah heard enough. "My mom doesn't take money," he shouted, voice cracking. "She fixes books. She makes soup when people are sick. She didn't steal anybody." The lobby went still. Clara dropped to her knees to hold him, but the damage had already happened. Noah was crying in front of cameras because adults had turned loneliness into entertainment. At the top of the ballroom stairs, Elliot saw them. He saw Clara's face, pale with humiliation. He saw Noah trying to be brave and failing, because no child should have to defend his mother from strangers. He saw Beatrice's carefully managed evening collapsing, and he understood. His silence had not protected anyone. It had only chosen who would suffer in his place. When Elliot walked onto the stage, the room expected the approved speech. He unfolded the paper, then set it aside. He spoke first of Maggie, not as a saint, not as a marble figure preserved for charity galas. As his wife, funny, impatient, generous, sometimes lonely in their marriage, because he had confused providing with being present. A murmur moved through the room. Beer stiffened. Elliot continued. He said Maggie would always be part of his life, but he had used her memory as a room to hide inside. He had let people pretend that loving the dead required closing every door to the living. Then he said Clara Bennett was not replacing Maggie. Noah was not replacing a child he and Maggie never had. And any love that might grow in his life now was not theft from the past. It was proof that grief had not killed every living part of him. He looked toward the cameras near the back. He asked the press to leave Clara and Noah alone. He said their kindness was not public property, their pain was not content, and their lives were not evidence in the trial of his mourning. The room did not applaud at first. Good. Applause would have made it too easy. After the gala, Elliot found Clara near the side entrance, Noah asleep against her shoulder. He expected anger. He deserved it. Clara gave it to him quietly. She said she was glad he had spoken. She was also furious that he had waited until Noah bled in public before he found the words. She could not let her son become the proof that Elliot was healing. Noah was a child, not a chapter in a widower's redemption story. Elliot flinched, but he did not argue. That was the first thing she needed from him. She asked for time, real time. No surprise visits, no expensive apologies, no using grief as a shortcut back into her life. Elliot agreed. A week later, a letter arrived for Noah, handwritten. Elliot apologized for letting grown-up pain become too loud around him. He wrote that Noah had done nothing wrong by caring about someone. Caring was brave. But adults were responsible for making safe places around children's hearts, and Elliot had failed to do that. Noah placed the letter beside Maggie Rock. Clara received a copy, shorter, folded inside another envelope. Elliot did not ask forgiveness. He did not ask to see her. He wrote only that he was learning love could not mean taking up space just because one was lonely. Sometimes love meant stepping back carefully enough that the other person could breathe. Clara read the letter twice, then once more. For the first time since the photograph leaked, she felt something inside her loosen. Not trust yet, not forgiveness, but the possibility that Elliot Grayson might be learning how to love with patience instead of power. A few months later, Elliot still visited Maggie's grave, but he no longer sat there all day in the rain like a man waiting to be punished. Sometimes he brought white flowers. Sometimes he brought a children's book from the library and read a page aloud, feeling foolish at first, then strangely peaceful. He told Maggie about the reading program, about the new shelves Clara had fought for, and about Noah's firm belief that rocks had complicated social lives. Maggie Rock remained beside the headstone. Elliot never moved it. Clara continued working at the library. The children's reading program expanded but carefully. The funding was transparent, managed through the library board, not turned into another Grayson publicity campaign. Elliot's name appeared where it had to, not where it could. That mattered to Clara. Noah missed Elliot, but the distance had helped him breathe. He no longer asked every morning whether Mr. Grayson was coming back. Instead, he drew pictures, named more rocks, and began to understand that people could care about each other without rushing to fill every empty chair. Clara missed Elliot too. Truth arrived quietly, not as pity, not as loneliness, not as gratitude for his help. She missed the way he listened when she talked about books, the way he let Noah interrupt him without impatience, the way he had stepped back when she asked, even though it hurt him. That was when she knew her feelings had become something real. They met again at the library on a bright Saturday morning, when a young oak tree was planted in Maggie's memory near the children's entrance. Beatrice came too. She stood stiffly at first, gloved hands enfolded, her face guarded against emotion. But when Noah placed a small stone near the base of the tree and announced that the tree did not replace Maggie, it just gave birds extra places to sit. Something in Beatrice softened. Later, she approached Clara. The apology was awkward, careful, and far from perfect. Beatrice admitted she had been afraid that if Elliot loved someone new, Maggie would be left behind. Clara looked at the tree, its small leaves moving in the wind. People who are loved that deeply don't disappear that easily, she said. After the planting, Elliot did not make a grand speech. He did not offer Clara a key, a ring, or a future wrapped in promises too large to trust. He simply asked if she and Noah would like to have dinner with him. Clara studied him for a moment. "Do you still need a family?" she asked. Elliot looked at Noah, then at her. "I used to think I needed someone to fill the empty space," he said. "Now I think I want to learn how to be present in a family without turning them into medicine for my grief." Noah raised his hand. "Will dinner have snacks?" Elliot smiled. "I learned at the cemetery that crying, talking, and living all use energy. So there will be snacks," Clara laughed. Then she said yes. 1 year later, on Maggie's anniversary, Elliot returned to the cemetery. This time, Clara and Noah came with him, but they stood a few steps back, giving his grief room to breathe. Elliot placed white flower by the stone. Noah added Maggie Rock, freshly washed for the occasion. Elliot told Maggie he still missed her. He still loved the life they had shared. But he was living now, not because he had forgotten her, but because he finally understood that love was not meant to become a prison for memory. When he turned away from the grave, Clara was waiting. Noah took his hand without asking, and together they left the cemetery, not as a replacement family, just 3 people who had learned that the heart can keep the dead tenderly and still make room for the living. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. Do you believe loving again after loss is a betrayal, or a way of honoring the love that taught us how to feel? Until next time, remember, a new love does not erase an old one. Sometimes the heart does not move on by forgetting. It moves forward by making room.